Hi, I'm Claire, and until last year, my only friend in the world was my sister, Emma. But then she got married, and I almost lost touch with her forever. But I've decided to do the most selfish thing to prevent that from happening. I hope you can understand after you hear my story. I have always been close to my older sister, Emma. When we were younger, she was the confident one with a great sense of humor, whereas I was quiet and shy. Our dad was never around, and our mom died when I was only in my teens, so it was just me and her. On one horrific day, I was driving to work when I got hit by a car that ran a red light. I woke up 2 days later and found out what had happened. I survived, but I'll be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. I got compensated so I don't have to work, but that meant my life got very small. I spent every day at home just waiting for Emma to get back from work. I didn't have many friends before the accident, and I couldn't face seeing them after. Eventually, the only person I spoke to was Emma. Emma was very social and loved going out. She always invited me to come along, but I always said no. She even used to put up adverts for local events on the fridge with magnets, hoping I would see something I wanted to go to. She told me that I shouldn't let my disability hold me back. But I didn't listen to her. I thought that everyone would look at me with pity and no one would want anything to do with me. I didn't mind her going out without me. I even enjoyed hearing about her time with her friends. Then one day she told me that she had met a man, Dan, who had asked her out on a date. He was a businessman from Australia, who she said had met him in a coffee shop when he accidentally picked up her Americano thinking it was his latte. I thought that was the lamest pickup ever. Soon, Emma was seeing Dan more and more. She seemed different since she met him. Things were happening so quickly, and I was worried about her. How could she be spending so much time with a man she barely knew? One night, she invited him round for dinner to meet me. I wasn't sure about him. How did my sister know he was with her for the right reasons? I tried to speak to Emma about it, but she got angry and told me that I needed to get my own life and that I should leave the house more. But I wouldn't listen. She was just trying to change the subject away from her and Dan. I decided to leave it for a while before I broached the subject again. One day, Emma came home all excited. Dan had proposed to her in a restaurant, and she had said yes. I asked her if she had really thought through marrying someone she had known less than a year, but she got really angry and told me that I needed to think about my own happiness and not interfere with hers. But I was still convinced that he wasn't as perfect as she said, so I decided to investigate. I Googled him to see what I could find. I found his Facebook, his Instagram, and his LinkedIn. I was worried he would see that I was spying on him, so I set up a fake account to follow him. Soon I noticed that a woman, Julie, liked a lot of his posts on Facebook. Then she started liking his pictures on Instagram too. All her social media was public, so I could see everything that she posted. One night, I saw that she had checked in at a posh bar in town. I asked Emma where Dan was, and she told me he was at a bar for a business meeting. I told Emma about Julie and how I thought that they were at the bar together. Emma was so angry that I had been following her fiancé's moves. I told her that if she thought I was wrong, that she should go to the bar and see it for herself. So she stormed out of the house and went to the bar to confront him. I sat and waited up for her until she came back an hour later, in tears. She had walked into the bar and seen Dan and Julie having drinks together. When he had seen Emma, he had looked uncomfortable, like he had been caught out. She went to confront him and he wouldn't tell her who Julie was. Emma was so upset that she threw her engagement ring back at him and told him she never wanted to see him again. She ran out of the bar and didn't look back. Over the next couple of days, Emma stayed in bed, and I got to look after her for once. Dan kept calling, but she didn't answer him and soon blocked his number. Then he turned up on our doorstep. I opened the door and told him to go home. He didn't listen. He ran past me and into her room to see her. They screamed and shouted at each other for ages, and then it went all quiet. An hour later, they came out of her room, hand in hand. I noticed that Emma was wearing her engagement ring again. I asked her what had happened. She told me that I had been wrong and that Dan hadn't been on a date at the bar or having an affair. Julie was an old friend who had offered him a job. He had met her in secret as he didn't want to tell Emma in case he didn't get the job. But he had got the job and accepted it. Emma said she had agreed not only to get married to Dan, but to move with him so he could take the job, which was all the way in Australia. I screamed at her that she couldn't leave me. She tried to reason with me, but I was so angry and upset I wasn't listening. She told me that my jealousy had gotten the better of me and that I needed to learn and look after myself. She walked out of the house with Dan. I shouted after her and started to follow, but when I got to the door, I just couldn't face going outside. I shouted and begged her to come back, but she walked away. 2 weeks later was their wedding day. I was the maid of honor and some of Emma's friends were bridesmaids. They all chatted to me and told me how nice it was to finally meet me, but I didn't want anything to do with them. All I could think about was how much I hated Dan for poisoning my sister against me. After the ceremony, he tried to talk to me, but I refused. I didn't want anything to do with the man who had stolen my sister from me. A week after the wedding, Emma emigrated to Australia and left me. As she left for the airport, I stayed in my room and refused to say goodbye to her. I felt so numb after she had gone. For the next few days, I stayed in the house. I got food delivered in and didn't speak to anyone. There wasn't anyone to speak to. Emma called me so many times, but I didn't answer. When she left me a voicemail threatening to call the police, I texted her to tell her I was okay, but to leave me alone. A few days later, I received a letter from Emma telling me that part of the reason that she left was she wanted me to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. I couldn't help but laugh when I read it. I was in a wheelchair. I would never stand again. So technically, that wouldn't work. But behind Emma's words was a message she kept trying to give me. I needed to stop feeling lonely and focusing my anger on her and Dan and start looking after myself instead. I suddenly felt racked with panic. Apart from Emma's wedding, I hadn't left the house for months. How could I now? And how could I cope without Emma there for support? I needed to have a think. I went to the kitchen to make a cup of tea when I saw the fridge. On it was the adverts that Emma had pinned in the hope I would see an event or club I would go to. I decided that I needed to be brave. I closed my eyes and picked an advert at random, promising to myself that whatever was on there, I would go. When I opened my eyes, I saw it was an advert for a weekly film quiz at a local pub. As nervous as I was determined to go. When it got to the night of the quiz, I was so scared, but I kept thinking about what Emma had said about me standing on my own 2 feet. When I got there, I sat in the doorway, shaking with fear. Why did I think that going to a pub quiz by myself was a good idea? I didn't know anyone. What if no one wanted me to be on their team? I took a deep breath and went in. The bar went quiet, and everyone on the table closest to me looked at me and stared. It was my worst nightmare. People were staring at my wheelchair. Then a man got up and came over to me. He smiled and introduced himself. He asked me to join their team as they were short a member. I felt so relieved that they weren't staring at my wheelchair. They were just pleased to see a new face. Life has got so much more exciting since then. I go to the quiz every week with my new friends, and I've even got in contact with some of Emma's friends I met at the wedding. As Emma has told me so much about them, I feel like I've known them for years. Now I have a great social life, and I'm going out of the house more than I have done for a very long time. Emma was right. I was only feeling lonely as I lacked confidence in myself. Her leaving me was the push I needed to be brave and go and make friends. But I know there is something else that I need to do, and it is going to be my biggest and scariest challenge yet. I have just booked a plane ticket to go to Australia and visit Emma. It's the first time I have flown by myself and the first traveling I've done since the accident. Emma doesn't know I am coming, and I can't wait to see her and surprise her. Keeping it a secret has been difficult, but I have had a lot of help from Dan. It was his idea, actually. He isn't as bad as I thought when I first met him. In fact, he's a nice guy, and I'm glad that Emma met him. If he hadn't married my sister, I would never have realized how strong I was after all.
Hi, I'm Caroline, and this is my story. One day I got a message from my mom while I was in class. I just read it in my notifications instead of opening it. It said, "Tom has left. Come over now." Tom is my dad's name. I was shocked. This message clearly wasn't meant for me. My heart pounded as I considered the possibilities. Was my mom having an affair? I wrote back asking my mom about the message, but she'd already deleted it from our chat, and she told me it was just a mistake. She was being so shady. I knew she had to be cheating on my dad. I was so angry I could barely breathe. I told the teacher I didn't feel well and left class. Then I bolted home, determined to find out what was going on. I hid in some bushes by my house where I could see the driveway. I had my camera ready. I had no idea what I would do once I found out who my mom's mystery man was. How could I tell my dad? He'd be devastated, especially since things had been going so well for him recently. He'd just gotten a big promotion at work and had been walking around whistling. He was so happy. And what would I say to my mom? I wanted to scream at her. Finally, a familiar SUV parked across the street several houses down. That confused me even more. How did I know that car? Then the driver got out. It was my Uncle Jim. If I'd thought I was angry before, it was nothing compared to now. How could my mom cheat on my dad with his own brother? I tried to think back to family gatherings we'd had. Had my mom and Uncle Jim ever seemed too friendly? Had they ever snuck away together? I couldn't remember. My dad was going to be so furious. He might not even believe it. I barely believed it myself. But what other explanation was there for my mom's message? And for my uncle parking so far away, like he didn't want to be seen. I started snapping pictures of Uncle Jim walking up to the house. I wished I'd screenshotted my mom's accidental message to me. Once he was inside, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to take more pictures through the window, but was afraid I'd overhear something I definitely didn't want to hear. Finally, I gathered my courage and went to the window, peering in carefully. My mom was pouring champagne into flutes. She handed one to Jim. My eyes filled with tears as I realized I hadn't been wrong. My mom really was romantically involved with Uncle Jim. I snapped a couple of pictures, then ran back to the bushes. I started rehearsing my speech to my mom, but I couldn't get any further than, "How could you?" I tried rehearsing my speech to my dad instead. "I've got some really bad news about Mom." I didn't want to be the one to tell him, but he deserved to know. I was almost crying with anger as I wondered what would happen to our family now. Would he and Mom get divorced? Who would I live with? I hoped my dad, since I'd never be able to trust my mom again. But what if my mom hated me for telling him? I was mad at her, but I didn't want her to stop loving me. Maybe I shouldn't say anything and try to get my dad to figure it out on his own. By the time my dad arrived home, I was in a panic. Uncle Jim still hadn't left. I couldn't let my dad just walk in on them. He needed to be prepared. I raced up onto the front porch as he was putting the key into the door. I had my phone ready so I could show him the pictures. He was startled to see me. "Hey, Caro," he said, turning the key and pushing the door open. "I didn't know you were out here." "Don't go in there," I told him, trying to grab his arm as he stepped inside. "I have to tell you." But just then, my mom and uncle and a bunch of my dad's friends yelled surprise. They were standing in the kitchen next to a huge cake, holding flutes of champagne. Uncle Jim handed one to my dad, slapping him on the shoulder. "Congratulations on the promotion, little brother," my uncle said. My dad looked shocked. but not as shocked as I was. This had been a surprise party for my dad all along, and if I'd paid attention to all the cars parked on the street, I would have seen that a lot of them belonged to family members. My dad was walking around thanking and hugging everyone, and I just stood there, feeling so stupid. My mom spotted me and said, "Hey, Caroline, I didn't expect you home yet. I thought you had practice after school." My face got hot. I didn't want to tell her what I'd thought. "Yeah, it's canceled. I didn't know you were throwing a party for Dad." "Yes, we're so proud of him," my mom said, kissing my father. I was so relieved by the familiar sight of my parents in love. "Well, come on in, Caroline, and get some cake." So that's how I learned not to jump to conclusions and to be careful about sticking my nose where it doesn't belong. Have you ever had an embarrassing misunderstanding? Or made judgments about someone before you understood the situation?